Welcome to a journey through history, where we uncover the untold story of one man's courageous struggle against the horrors of slavery. This is not just any story, but the story of John Brown, a man who dared to fight against an unjust system and gave everything for the cause. Throughout history, there have been many stories of heroes who have stood up against oppression, but John Brown's story stands out. He was a man who refused to accept the status quo and took matters into his own hands. He believed that slavery was a sin and dedicated his life to fighting against it, but his struggle was not an easy one. John Brown faced countless challenges and obstacles along the way. He was ridiculed, criticized, and even threatened with violence, but he remained steadfast in his convictions and ultimately gave his life for the cause. So join us as we delve into the story of John Brown's struggle against slavery. This is a story of courage, determination, and sacrifice. It is a story that will inspire and challenge you, and leave you with a new appreciation for the power of one person's commitment to justice. Don't miss out on this epic journey through history. Slavery is an abhorrent practice that has plagued human society for centuries. It is a stain on our collective history and a reminder of the horrific treatment of black people throughout the world. However, in the face of this injustice, there have been many heroes who have stood up and fought against it. One of the most notable of these heroes is John Brown, whose struggle against slavery remains one of the most fascinating and inspiring stories of American history. John Brown was a man who dedicated his life to the fight against slavery. Born in 1800, Brown grew up in a family that was strongly opposed to slavery. As he grew older, Brown became increasingly convinced that slavery was a sin, and that it was his duty to fight against it. Throughout his life, Brown engaged in various forms of anti-slavery activism, including participation in the Underground Railroad and violent confrontations with pro-slavery forces in Kansas. His activism culminated in the infamous raid on Harpers Ferry, Virginia, in 1859. Though his life was ultimately sacrificed, John Brown's struggle against slavery remains a testament to the power of conviction and the human spirit. John Brown's early life was marked by tragedy and hardship, which would ultimately shape his views on slavery and inspire his anti-slavery activism. Born in Connecticut in 1800, Brown grew up in a family that was actively involved in the abolitionist movement. His father was a strong believer in the equal treatment of all people regardless of race and instilled these values in his children. However, Brown's childhood was also marked by the death of several of his siblings and his mother's struggles with mental illness. These experiences may have contributed to Brown's intense passion for justice and his willingness to take bold action against injustice. As Brown grew older, he became increasingly convinced that slavery was a moral abomination that must be eradicated. He became involved in the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people escape to freedom in the North. Brown also participated in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a conflict between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces in Kansas, which was known as Bleeding Kansas. During this time, Brown became known for his violent tactics against pro-slavery groups, which earned him both supporters and detractors. Despite the controversy surrounding his actions, Brown remained steadfast in his beliefs and continued to fight against slavery until his dying breath. John Brown's anti-slavery activism took many forms, including his participation in the Underground Railroad and his involvement in the Bleeding Kansas conflict. However, it was his use of violence that earned him a reputation as a controversial and polarizing figure. Brown believed that the only way to end slavery was through armed resistance, and he was not afraid to use force to achieve his goals. In May 1856, Brown and his followers attacked a group of pro-slavery settlers in Kansas, killing 5 men in what became known as the Potawatomi Massacre. This violent act shocked many people, but it also galvanized Brown's supporters and made him a hero in the eyes of many abolitionists. Despite the controversy surrounding his tactics, Brown remained committed to the fight against slavery. In 1859, he made plans to launch a raid on the federal armory at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, with the goal of seizing weapons and sparking a rebellion of enslaved people. Brown and his followers, who included both black and white men, captured the armory, but were quickly surrounded by federal troops. The ensuing standoff lasted several days, during which time Brown was wounded and captured. The raid ultimately failed, but it became a rallying cry for abolitionists and helped to push the country closer to civil war. The raid on Harpers Ferry is perhaps the most well-known event in John Brown's life. Brown and his followers, numbering around 20 men, arrived in Harpers Ferry in October 1859 with the intention of seizing the federal armory and sparking a rebellion of enslaved people. They were able to take control of the armory and capture several hostages, but they soon found themselves surrounded by federal troops. Over the course of several days, Brown and his followers were unable to break through the encirclement, and they eventually retreated to a nearby engine house, where they were cornered and forced to surrender. The raid on Harpers Ferry was a dramatic and daring act of anti-slavery resistance, but it ultimately failed to achieve its objectives. Brown was captured and put on trial for treason, murder, and inciting a slave insurrection. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, which was carried out on December 2nd, 1859. Despite the failure of the raid, Brown's actions and his subsequent execution helped to galvanize the abolitionist movement and contributed to the growing tensions between North and South that would eventually lead to the Civil War. After the raid on Harpers Ferry, John Brown's fate was sealed. He was put on trial for his crimes, which included murder, treason, and inciting a slave insurrection. Brown did not deny his actions and used his trial as a platform to speak out against slavery and the injustices that he had witnessed. He famously declared that he had not only a legal but a moral right to do what he had done, and that he was ready for the gallows, if that was the price he had to pay for his beliefs. Despite the impassioned defense put forth by Brown and his supporters, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 2nd, 1859, John Brown was led to the gallows and executed for his crimes. His execution was a highly publicized event and drew national attention to the issue of slavery. Brown's final words, which included a call for the abolition of slavery and a prediction that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood, became legendary and helped to further inflame the tensions between North and South. Brown's death was a tragic end to a life of intense commitment and sacrifice, but his legacy would live on as a symbol of the fight against slavery and the pursuit of justice. John Brown's legacy is a complicated one, but there is no denying the impact that he had on the fight against slavery. Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry and subsequent execution helped to galvanize the abolitionist movement and push the country closer to civil war. Brown's unwavering commitment to his beliefs, even in the face of extreme opposition and danger, has inspired generations of activists and revolutionaries. Brown's tactics of using violence to fight against injustice, while controversial, have also influenced movements for social change around the world. Despite the impact that John Brown had on the abolitionist movement, his legacy is not without criticism. Some have argued that Brown's violent tactics were counterproductive and ultimately served to reinforce the very system of oppression that he was fighting against. Others have criticized Brown's actions as being motivated by a desire for personal glory rather than a genuine commitment to justice. However, even with these criticisms, there is no denying that John Brown's struggle against slavery remains one of the most fascinating and inspiring stories of American history. John Brown's use of violence in his anti-slavery activism has been a subject of controversy and debate for many years. Some have praised Brown for his willingness to take bold action against injustice, while others have criticized his tactics as being counterproductive and ultimately harmful to the cause. However, it is important to recognize that Brown's use of violence was not an isolated incident, but rather a response to the extreme violence and brutality of the slave system. Brown saw violence as a necessary means to an end, and he was willing to risk his own life in order to bring about the end of slavery. Despite the controversy surrounding his use of violence, there is no denying that John Brown's commitment to justice and his willingness to take action against oppression continue to inspire people around the world. Brown's legacy has influenced countless movements for social change, from the civil rights movement in the United States to the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Regardless of one's views on Brown's tactics, his unwavering dedication to the cause of freedom and equality serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against injustice, even in the face of extreme opposition. John Brown's story has been a popular subject in literature, film, and TV for many years. Perhaps the most famous fictional portrayal of Brown is in the novel Cloudsplitter by Russell Banks, which presents a fictionalized account of Brown's life through the eyes of his son. Other notable works include the play The Trial of John Brown, by Ron Osborne, the film Santa Fe Trail starring Errol Flynn, and the recent TV series The Good Lord Bird starring Ethan Hawke. Each of these works presents a different interpretation of Brown's life and legacy, and has contributed to the ongoing debate about the significance of his actions. Despite the differences in these portrayals, there are certain elements of John Brown's story that remain consistent across all mediums. Brown is consistently portrayed as a deeply committed and passionate man who was willing to risk everything in order to fight against injustice. His legacy has been shaped by the many debates surrounding his actions and tactics, but one thing is clear: John Brown remains one of the most fascinating and complex figures in American history. The story of John Brown's struggle against slavery is full of valuable lessons and insights that remain relevant today. One of the most important lessons that can be gleaned from Brown's story is the power of conviction. Brown was a man who was deeply committed to his beliefs, and he was willing to take bold action in order to advance his cause. His unwavering dedication to justice serves as an inspiration to people around the world who are fighting against oppression and inequality. Another important lesson that can be learned from John Brown's story is the complexity of using violence in activism. While Brown's tactics were controversial and have been criticized by many, there is no denying that his actions had a significant impact on the fight against slavery. Brown's story serves as a reminder that the use of violence in activism is a deeply nuanced issue that must be approached with caution and thoughtfulness. While violence can be a powerful means of resistance, it can also lead to unintended consequences and further violence. As we continue to grapple with issues of social justice and activism, John Brown's story remains an important and thought-provoking example of the complexities and challenges that we face. In conclusion, John Brown's struggle against slavery is a story that continues to captivate and inspire people around the world. His unwavering dedication to justice and his willingness to take bold action against oppression serve as a powerful reminder of the power of individual action in the face of injustice. Brown's legacy remains a complex one, full of controversy and debate, but there is no denying the impact that he had on the fight against slavery and the pursuit of justice. As we continue to grapple with issues of inequality and oppression, John Brown's story remains a valuable and thought-provoking example of the power of conviction and the importance of standing up against injustice. Brown's life and legacy serve as a reminder that change is possible, but it requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to take bold action. We must continue to draw inspiration from the example set by John Brown and work to create a world that is free from oppression and inequality for all people. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the untold story of John Brown's struggle against slavery. We hope that you have been inspired by his unwavering commitment to justice and the power of individual action in the face of oppression. John Brown's story is a powerful reminder that change is possible, but it requires courage, conviction, and a willingness to take bold action. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll be helping us to spread the word about the importance of social justice and activism, and ensure that more people are inspired by stories like John Brown's. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.